This is a Sports Catastrophe production. Hey there, ho there. It's Jeff Connor Diamond. Welcome you to another Sports Catastrophe birthday boy. I know that this birthday boy is technically dead because I couldn't find a living one for September 21st, but he was born September 21st. So anyway, this guy played for the Montreal Canadiens, Chicago Blackhawks, and New York Rangers. It was kind of weird how he's a Montreal icon and he played elsewhere. But anyway, this guy was a great player for the OHA and set several Ontario records until the Canadiens convinced him to play. Anyway, Howie Morenz would play 14 years in the NHL, winning 3 Stanley Cups. He was in the top 10 in points 10 times out of 14 years. That's pretty impressive. For 7 straight years, he was the goals and points leader for the Habitants. And he won 3 Hart trophies for MVP. So Howie Morenz was born in Mitchell, Ontario. Howie had 3 sisters and 2 brothers. He was a star and all that. Morenz actually tried to enlist in the Canadian military, but because he was only 15, he was refused. So he became an apprentice at the National Railway in Stratford. In 1926, he would marry McKay, having 3 children, Howie Jr., Donald, and Marlene. Well, they're all deceased. Marlene was the last one of the 3 to die in March 2018. Marlene would later marry Bernie Geoffrion, who played for the Canadiens and Rangers. So it's weird how Bernie Geoffrion knew that he was dating the daughter of a Montreal legend like Howie Morenz. And their son, Dan Geoffrion, played for the Habs in 79-80. Didn't really have that much of a career. Well, Danny Geoffrion's son, Blake, played for the University of Wisconsin, was the Hobey Baker winner for top collegiate hockey player in 2010, and made his debut with Nashville in 2011. But he got traded to Montreal in 2012, so that all 4 generations of the Morenz Geoffrion family played within the Habs organization. So anyway, Howie Morenz was tearing up in the OHA. Unfortunately for his Stratford team, they lost the 1921 Memorial Cup to the Winnipeg Falcons. So he played in the senior league for Stratford. And Montreal saw that and all that. A friend of Leo Durnarand, the owner of the Habs at the time, refereed the game and said that Morenz was very good and all that. They wanted to sign with the Habs. But he needed his father's permission because Howie was 20, but still legally a minor. And anyway, Durnarand in July 1923 found out that Morenz, Howie, and his dad were in contact with the Toronto St. Pats. Oh, yeah, I forgot to mention that Howie Morenz was born September 21st, 1902. Or did I? I can't remember. But anyway, contact with the Toronto St. Pats. And Durnarand sent Cecil Hart to Stratford to get Morenz at every cost. Morenz would sign a 3-year deal with the Habs. But Morenz would reconsider and all that. Stratford residents wanted him to stay, so he wrote a letter in August saying that he could at leave Stratford and gave him the check back. Anyway, Morenz tried his best to explain why he couldn't sign with Montreal. However, the story goes that Morenz was shown around Montreal with the players of the Habs and convinced Howie to stay in Montreal. And you get his rookie season, Montreal ended up winning the Stanley Cup, defeating the Calgary Tigers. Thinking Calgary had an AHL team before the Flames? No. At the time, the Stanley Cup between 1918 and 26, the NHL champions would play a team from the Pacific Coast Hockey League Association. you know, there were big rivals to PCHA with the Patricks being the main guys. So that's what happened. They wanted to go East versus West with a Stanley Cup. And the NHL won all but one. That was 1925. Morenz would put up 28 goals in the second season, but the Habs would shockingly lose the final Stanley Cup Finals to Victoria. However, he helped Montreal do pretty well. He was named the MVP or the Hart Trophy winner in 1928. He did well, and in 1930, he helped the Habs win the Stanley Cup, shocking the unbeatable Boston Bruins, because Boston had only 5 losses in the 1930 season, and they had not lost back-to-back. So the Habs shocked them. And in 1931, the Habs took care of Chicago. Despite Morenz playing with an injured shoulder, the Habs still won the Stanley Cup. So he won his 3rd cup as a Hab. Morenz looked good and all that. In 1932, he set the record for most points by a player in the NHL, passing Cy Dennehy. Remember, this is 1932. Anywho, he still did a lot of things. Unfortunately, though, Morenz kept getting injured and all that. After returning to the team after a serious injury, the fans began booing him. And rumors were that the Habs were going to trade Morenz. Morenz did not want to play for any team other than Montreal. So anything happened. But just before the 1934 season started, Morenz was traded with Lawrence Chabot to the Chicago Blackhawks for Leroy Grotzberg, Lionel Conacher, and defenseman Roger Jenkins. Well, they traded a goalie to the Blackhawks. Surprised the Blackhawks didn't send someone back. Well, the Blackhawks needed a goalie because their main guy, Charlie Gardner, died of a brain hemorrhage just months after giving the Stanley Cup to Chicago. I forgot who Montreal had. It wasn't Hainsworth because he was a Leaf. Anyhow, he would play in every game for the Blackhawks in 1935, scoring 34 points. He didn't feel comfortable in Chicago. And after 23 games in his sophomore season with Chicago, he was traded to the Rangers. He would only score 6 points in 19 games for the Rangers. And the Habs in 1936 were grasping at straws. They decided to have Cecil Hart be coach of the team. But Cecil made one condition, that the Habs must bring Howie Morenz back. Deal. So Morenz's contract was purchased from the Rangers. Morenz was okay, 20 points in his career. His final game was as a player was January 20th, 1937 at the Forum against the Blackhawks. Morenz went after the puck, being chased by defenseman Earl Siebert. Morenz lost his balance and fell to the ice, crashing into the boards and catching his left skate in the wooden siding. Boards were not what they were nowadays. Unfortunately, Siebert landed on him with full force, snapped Morenz's left leg, creating noise heard throughout the rink. His leg would be fractured in 4 places. I knew that Morenz was done for. So anyway, lots of people would bring him drinks and all that. Morenz would find himself alone in the hospital, unable to move past his bed. Unfortunately, when Montreal slipped in the standings, he became depressed and all that. He had a nervous breakdown. Anyway, his family did visit him on most days, and Morenz became complaining of chest pains, which he thought was a heart attack. And around 11:30 p.m., he actually tried to use the washroom, get out of bed, but collapsed on the floor and died of a coronary embolism caused by blood clots from his damaged leg. So anyway, the Habs were supposed to play the Montreal Maroons the next day, March 9th, 1937. It was supposed to be canceled, but Morenz's widow said no. You wouldn't want it that way. The game to be played. But 2 days later, a funeral was held, and fans filed past the casket. 50,000 fans paid their respects. Anyway, he was buried in Mount Royal Cemetery, Montreal. The Habs retired Morenz number 7, November 1937, becoming the first time Montreal had retired a number. This was before the benefit All-Star game, which saw the Montreal players from the Habs and Maroons team up to face a team of players from the other NHL teams. And unfortunately for Montreal, they lost the game 6-5. Howie Morenz was one of the first group of inductees into the Hockey Hall of Fame in 1945. It was just amazing and all that. As late as 1998, he was actually named one of the top 20 greatest hockey players of all time. Well, Morenz actually, because of his great play in the 1924 Stanley Cup Final for Montreal, Charles Adams, who's an owner of a chain of grocery stores, actually wanted a hockey team in Boston. So Boston got the team. And Tex Rickard, owner of Madison Square Garden, was so impressed by Morenz, he wanted to bid for his own NHL team, that being the New York Americans. So it was amazing, all that. So yeah, it's funny how Bertie Geoffrion was Howie Morenz's son-in-law. And then when his number 5 was retired, March 11, 2006, they lowered Morenz's number 7 down to catch up to the number 5 of Geoffrion being raced up, and then they both went up together. So Morenz would play 550 regular season games, 271 goals, 472 points with 13 goals in 39 playoff games, 3 Stanley Cups, 24, 30, 31. The top scorer in 28, 31. But he would have won the Art Ross twice, but the Art Ross trophy was not officially given until 1947. He won 3 MVPs, 28, 31, 32. So he was a legend in his own mind. And to be a legend in Southwestern Ontario, you could bank on it. Anyway, I'm Jeff Diamond. I do.